Welcome to the HerbWorks podcast featuring Roger Drummer, the formulator at herbworks.com. An educator in the field of nutrition and Chinese herbalism, Roger has a unique ability to keep things simple by taking all the guesswork out of complicated health issues. HerbWorks is committed to helping you improve your health and enhance your life through herbs and common sense.
Roger Drummer here with another HerbWorks podcast. Today we're going to be talking about longevity, anti-aging, and tonic herbalism, and how you really can't separate those three things. This is one of my favorite topics, talking about tonic herbalism, and really I think the only topic that you could be talking about when it comes to longevity and anti-aging, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So today we're going to be covering this whole idea of longevity, anti-aging. We're going to talk a little bit about nutrition versus herbs and just the different types of herbology, like tonic herbalism, medicinal herbalism, kind of getting an understanding of what those things are actually about. And just so you know my background, I was trained in tonic herbalism. Now, what does that mean? For most people don't know what that means, but tonic herbalism means that I've been trained in the use of food-grade herbs to balance and build your body up, as opposed to medicinal herbalism where you would think you go to a doctor to get something for a flu or a cold or an infection or some acute condition. Tonic herbalism is not about acute conditions. It's about longevity, that word we talked about earlier. It's about building your system up so it's stronger, and then you can withstand long periods of stress or withstand an infection if you get it and recover much quicker because your body's in a position to actually heal itself. That's what tonic herbalism is about. And really, tonic herbalism was right there at the beginning of Chinese herbology. You know, when you're talking about tonic herbalism, you're talking about a system within a bigger system. And just so you kind of get an idea of what this is about, because most people don't understand that there's different types of herbs. And tonic herbs, remember, are foods. In other words, a tonic herb is something you could take every day and have it as part of your diet. In fact, in China, they might take tonic herbs and throw it into a soup and let it cook for hours and hours while the soup is cooking. Say you're making a chicken soup and you want to build blood. You'd add some blood tonics, you'd add some other herbs to it, and that herbs would cook out and become part of the broth. And then that would be served with the chicken soup. So it's just part of the whole meal. And those herbs would enhance your body's ability to make energy and blood out of that soup that you're eating. That's what tonic herbalism is. Today, because of modern technology, we can make those things into a tea at home if you prefer that. Or you can buy them in a capsule. You can buy them in a tincture. You can get them in any form you want to supplement your diet. Now, tonics are generally taken on an empty stomach, a half hour to 45 minutes before you eat, so you can take advantage of this building activity of the herbs that goes right along with the building activity of your food. So that's kind of how tonics are looked at. And tonics originated with Chinese herbology thousands of years ago. In fact, they became popular because the emperor of China would often employ a Taoist herbalist. You know, the Taoists who were this sect of, not really religion, but it was a philosophy. And they had a lot of followers in China. And they had this system of herbology to keep them strong. And during their trainings with Kung Fu and different exercises, and they learned about plants and things from nature. They were really connected to nature. And part of that connection was tonic herbalism. And they were employed by the emperor often to keep him strong and vital and youthful because, you know, the emperor had so many concubines. He was getting worn out. He needed to keep his energy up, and he wanted to live forever, basically. So that's when they started applying most of these tonic herbs to the emperor, to people in general, to build their system up, because they came up with this idea that your energy, or your sexual energy in particular when you're working with the emperor, your energy had to do with the strength of your kidney adrenal energy. It was part of something called Jing. Jing was your life force consolidated in your body, and your glandular system was kind of what that Jing energy revolved around. And the biggest loss of Jing was often through excessive sexual energy. So they came up with these tonic herbs that actually put energy back into that system so that you could use it quite often without becoming worn out. And those same herbs today apply to modern living, because today we have so many more and so much more profound stress, emotional stress in our life that turns on our adrenals and causes us to drain energy. You don't even have to be having excessive sex. You just have to be stressed out all day long to lose this energy out of your glandular system. And unless you have something to put that back in, then you're going to age more rapidly and start to lose your health. This was the biggest thing I ever learned in the health industry, was back when I became an apprentice and started learning about Chinese herbology. I actually had chronic fatigue. And I was one of those people that had spent, at least a decade in the health industry, managing health food stores. I knew all about vitamins and nutrition. I had a degree in nutrition, and I knew everything, I thought at the time I needed to know about nutrition. And yet I had chronic fatigue. And so I couldn't get my energy back. And I fell into that age-old idea that something had invaded my body, and I just had to figure out what it was and kill it. So the only herbs that I took were things that were antiviral, things that I thought was going to kill off this bug that was in my system that surely was the cause of my low energy and chronic fatigue. And then I kind of almost by mistake, became an apprentice in a Chinese herb shop and learned about tonic herbalism, and really got into the idea that, hey, yeah, I was worn out, and if you're worn out, you don't have the energy to even make energy, or what they called qi, out of the food that you eat. So it was a whole different concept of health, and it was my first introduction to tonic herbalism. So in that system, the herbalist there at the shop said that I needed to put energy back into my glandular system and into my organs that built qi so that my body could start to build energy. And so it was a whole different idea of, instead of attack and destroy something, it was to build something up. And as I look back on it now, and it seems so simple, that the whole idea, because I was worn out. I was so tired I could barely walk around. And when I was apprenticing, I never actually sat down or took a break because I'd just fall asleep. So I had to stay standing up, moving all the time, or I'd just pass out. That's how tired I was. I often tell this story that I had the job of stocking shelves with bottles of herbs. And you know how small a bottle of herbs is. Just go into an average health food store and look at a bottle of capsules. Well, if I picked up 3 of those bottles, one at a time, and put it on a shelf, my arm was completely worn out. It hurt so bad to raise that little bottle of herbs, which probably weighed 3 ounces, up to the shelf and put it on the shelf. That's how tired I was. And anybody with chronic fatigue hearing this knows exactly what I'm talking about. So I started taking some tonics, things that put energy back into my reproductive system, into my glandular system, that affected my digestion so I could absorb more nutrients from my food. And within a few weeks, I had a big bump up in my energy. I started to feel different. I started to stand up straighter. I had more energy. My whole life gradually just started to change. And over time, I came out of my chronic fatigue. Now, I didn't do any herbs at that time as medicines to kill off something in my system. I simply became stronger. And by regaining my strength, my body started to heal itself. Now, it still didn't happen overnight. It took me a long time to crawl out of the hole that I had found myself in, but I was making progress every single day. There wasn't a week that went by that I couldn't look back and see something that happened to me that I considered to be profound because of how I had let myself become completely worn out.
This podcast is brought to you by Herbworks, specializing in stress and brain essentials. Check out Roger's other articles and videos at herbworks.com. While you're there, take a look at our natural herbal-based product line for energy, stress, immunity, and sleep. Now back to Roger.
And this really comes back to this whole idea of longevity and why, in my opinion, tonic herbalism is really the only thing you can talk about when it comes to longevity and anti-aging. You know, in Western nutrition, which is where this concept gets kicked around in America so much, they're always talking about antioxidants being, longevity substances, anti-aging substances. They're always coming up with a new multivitamin or some nutritional product that's anti-aging. Well, in reality, if you're applying simple science to how your cells work, any single nutrient in the world, it doesn't matter if it's vitamin A, vitamin C, B1 or B6, whatever it is, any single substance can be called, theoretically, an anti-aging substance because it improves the health of the cell. And if the cell's health is improved, then it basically extends the life of that cell. And if that cell's in a healthier position, then when it replicates, it will replicate a more healthy cell. So theoretically, that is true. But the problem with that is that most of the time, especially with someone like me who had chronic fatigue, I didn't have a nutrition problem. I had great nutrition. In fact, I've been to many specialists when I had chronic fatigue. And this was back, by the way, back before they knew what they know today about chronic fatigue. And literally after a while of trying to figure out what's wrong with somebody, in my case, they decided that I was making it up because I had such perfect blood. I would do blood tests, every test known to man at that time, and they would look at it. And one doctor told me, I don't know what's wrong with you because I'm looking at your chart here and you should be Superman. You should be able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, right? He gave the quote right out of the Superman comic books. So anyway, but literally I was so tired. I felt like jumping across the desk and strangling him, yet I didn't have the energy to stand up and do that. So the reality is that I was completely wasted, worn out, and didn't know where to turn. But yet, when you looked at my blood work, I was right in all the best parameters of how Western medicine looks at your health and decides whether there's something going on with you or if you're making it up. I was labeled a hypochondriac because they couldn't find anything wrong with me. And yet I was so tired, I could barely function at all. And so when I discovered Chinese herbology, this is where I learned really what I consider to be the most important thing I've ever learned about anything in health. And that is that tonic herbs are different from nutrition and from medicinal herbs in the fact that they put energy back into worn out glands and organs. They have an energy to them. The herbs have an energy to them that's different than the chemical analysis that you might be able to make on that herb. And they do this with all food. You can look up any food. Doesn't matter if it's a fig or it's asparagus or it's broccoli, and they'll tell you the exact breakdown of all the chemical nutrients in that food. But it doesn't really tell you the energy of that food. And it's the same way with herbs. They can do a breakdown of every single herb known to man and tell you the chemicals in it, but it doesn't tell you the energy or how that energy affects your body. It's completely different. I had a really great experience once, and after I'd been an herbalist for about 5 years, I was sent from our store down in California to the World Ginseng Conference up in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I was up there for a week, and after the conference was over, I was actually sent up to inspect a bunch of ginseng farms in British Columbia. It was really quite a lot of fun. But at the conference, the one thing I still remember, and this is clear back in the 90s that this happened, so it's been quite a while, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was talking to a Chinese gentleman, and I was talking to him about wild ginseng. And I was so excited to be at this conference because I had had amazing experiences with wild ginseng. Now, very few people ever get the opportunity to taste or even consume wild ginseng. And it's a very, how would you put it? It's a very complex herb to figure out, and it has to be extracted in the exact way and the exact form to really get the benefit from it. So even if you have wild ginseng, most often it's in a form that you're really not going to get more than 10% of the value out of it because it hasn't been extracted properly. It's a complex herb, but I've had so many experiences with wild ginseng. And at the time, I was so excited to go to this conference because I knew, I was going to see all these wild roots. There's going to be all these people from all over the world that dealt with ginseng. And when I got there, I realized after being there about a half a day that nobody there really knew anything about ginseng. They didn't know anything about wild ginseng in particular. And here I was, this guy who was just coming out of his chronic fatigue years earlier and had learned about wild ginseng and other tonic herbs just through firsthand experiences and just amazing experiences of using it and being sensitive to energy and how it moves and how it flows. And I realized standing there and not even being egotistical about it, I knew more about wild ginseng than anybody in the entire World Ginseng Conference. And so I'm talking to this old Chinese guy who was the number one producer of ginseng in America at the time and had roots in his office that were 1,000 years old, just unbelievable ginseng. And I don't mean it grew for 1,000 years, but he had some rare root that had been given to him that had been harvested, 1,000 years before. It was in his family for so long. It was probably worthless by now because they'd had it for so long. But he had roots that were in his possession that were worth $5,000 to $10,000 a piece, easily. And these roots, they only weigh about an ounce, but they were roots that were 100 years old, 120 years old. And by that age, I mean that's how old they were before they were picked, right? So he had these roots. And he had these roots displayed in his office. And I started asking him about it. And I realized while I was talking to him that I didn't think he really knew the value of those roots. In fact, he finally just said to me, he goes, those roots aren't worth any more than the roots I have growing out on the farm that I pick after 4 or 5 years and sell them for $50 a pound. He goes, it's just superstition. It's just roots that grew for a long period of time. I have them up on my wall just because of tradition and all this other stuff. And I said, but they have wild roots have an energy to them that is completely different than the roots that you're cultivating. And he looked at me and he said, if there was anything in those roots, we'd have found it by now. We've dissected every root known to man, and there's nothing in them but this chemical, and that chemical. And so it's just all superstition. I thought to myself, wow, how could this guy have these amazing things hanging on his wall? And how could I maybe break into his office and steal them? That's what I was thinking. Although I would never do that. But the reality is he had these roots that were just mind-blowing in value to the person who actually knew what they were about. But obviously he didn't. So they were worthless. They were hanging on his wall. And so the reality is that I tell this story because there's an energy to herbs that is imparted to your body that's separate from the chemical analysis of that particular herb. And this is what helped me when I had chronic fatigue, and this is what differentiates Chinese herbology, especially tonic herbalism, from all other herbs in the world. Because every herbal system is based on medicine. You go to someone when you're sick, you get herbs to cure your illness. When you're done with your illness, you move on and you don't go back and do anything. The reality is with tonic herbalism, it's about establishing a relationship with the herbs, getting your health back, and then developing a program that you can take for most of the rest of your life, basically. You don't have to take it every single day, but you work these herbs into your program, into your lifestyle that keep you healthy and functioning and vital and alive. That's really what it's about. And so I was reading this book the other day, really fascinating book called Chinese Natural Cures. And in it, they had an article about Chinese doctors. And somebody had done a study of ancient Chinese doctors that had gone back for centuries. And so probably the last 2,000 years, they looked at 80 different famous physicians. And so they're looking at all these physicians and how long they actually lived. And they came up with an average lifespan of about 80 years, right? So when they compared that to the average age of the person living at that particular time, what they came up with was the average age of most people in industrial nations was 40. So these Chinese physicians on average had lived twice as long as regular people. Now, how could that possibly be, right? So they had some quotes in the book, which I found fascinating and kind of goes back to the topic of what we're talking about today. One of the doctors, his name was Meng Shen, lived in the year 621. He lived to be 92 years of age. You know, back in 621, if you lived to be 92, that was quite an amazing feat. You have to remember, there was no modern medicine then, no emergency health care. There was no ready cares down on the block. So anyway, this is a quote from him. It said, "A person who really knows how to nourish the body should always keep good foods and herbs handy." And then here's another quote from a guy who lived in the year 581, and he lived to be 101 years old. His name was Sun Shu Mao. "Anyone over 40 should avoid laxatives, which will weaken the body, and begin to take tonics. Anyone over 50 years should take tonics all year round. Such are the secrets of nourishing life to enjoy longevity." So he's saying basically that once you reach a certain age, 50 years of age in this instance, you should begin to take tonics and take them all the time. Now, why is that 50-year mark? Because it's pretty much understood that when you reach 50, you're getting worn out. Especially today, people are so stressed out. You're getting worn out, you're losing your vital energy, and you begin to age more rapidly. And that's because here in the West, in America, we don't have anything in our whole nutritional system, our way of looking at health, that actually builds you up. Everything is based on medicines for acute conditions. Sure, there's a lot of information now coming out with food and how food build your system up. But food in general, no matter how good it is it pales in comparison to the energy in tonic herbs. So tonic herbs are like taking the best grass-fed beef, the best organic vegetables, and kind of multiplying it by 10 to get the energy of something that's in a tonic herb. Now, there's no science behind what I just said, but you're kind of getting the idea. Food is just not as concentrated energetically as tonic herbs, and that's the difference. The combination of both of those are an amazing program. So here's this doctor talking about how you have to use tonics after the age of 50 because you start to become worn out and to start building your system up to prevent further weakening and getting worn out depending on your lifestyle. And this is the whole idea behind tonic herbalism that the Taoist priests came up with thousands of years ago. Their idea was that when you're 60 years of age, you should have the energy of someone who's around 40. And when you're 70 years of age, maybe around 50. And when you're in your 80s and 90s, you should have the vitality of somebody that's 60 years of age. And why is that? Because you put tonics back into your system, and you also practiced a lifestyle to where you just didn't dissipate your energy inappropriately. So you didn't become stressed out all the time. You didn't have excessive partying going on. You didn't do all these excessive behaviors that drained your life force. And at the same time, you had tonic herbs and you were putting this life force back into your body. And that's where this is where the origins really of longevity and anti-aging medicine comes from. This use of specific tonics in tonic herbalism to keep you from getting worn out. Now, I still practice this today. I no longer work in that herb shop in Los Angeles, but I've taken that decade or more of knowledge that I accumulated while working there and translated it over into my own herb company called HerbWorks. And I still focus on this idea of longevity, anti-aging, and tonic herbalism. And how do I do that? I do that by focusing mainly on adaptogenic herbs. Now, adaptogenic herbs are all tonics. In other words, they're food-grade herbs. They're all herbs you can take on a regular basis. And they're also herbs that fall into a special category that help you offset stress. Now, not all tonic herbs directly help you offset stress. I mean, in some regard they do, because like it could be an herb like sustanche. Sustanche is an amazing herb for building sexual energy, for putting energy back into your adrenals. It has a lot of benefits that way, but it's not an adaptogen because it doesn't help you to deal with the stressor to begin with. It's there to help you build some energy if you had one, but the reality is it's not something that works directly on the glandular system involved in stress. And that's what tonic herbs and adaptogenic herbs are so good at. Adaptogenic herbs regulate the glandular response to stress to make sure that you have a healthy stress response. In other words, to make sure you have the response and then have the next response, which is basically to shut your original stress response off and then to flood your body with the hormones needed to reset or recalibrate itself. Everything with stress is about not just the initial stress, it's about how your body regains its balance after it happens. It's kind of like when you're out surfing. You might get knocked off your board, but you have to get back up on it. Most people, when they're chronically stressed, have lost their ability to get back up on the board. And so they're just always knocked off and can never really regain their balance. And this is what tonics do. They help you to have a healthy response. And at the same time, once you have that rebalancing of your glandular response to stress, your body goes into this whole phase to where it starts to rebuild your adrenal energy. It starts to rebuild your hormones and rebuild your entire system that just was flooded with all this excessive energy to prepare you for fight or flight. All of that has to be rebalanced. All of that has to be rebuilt into your system and put back into a state to where your body rebuilds itself. And if you don't go into that phase, then that's a complete aging program. It's not anti-aging, it's aging, because your body just becomes worn out. And so adaptogenic herbs are truly anti-aging in the regard that they put energy back into your system and they help with the regulation of energy in your body. And this can't be overemphasized enough. Or it can't, I should say, this cannot be overemphasized, because you have to put energy back into your system, especially as you're aging, because if you don't, then you're just every single day going to be a little bit farther in debt and a little bit farther down the road of losing energy until you have that big crisis, that crisis moment that you can't recover from. And this is the whole idea, again, what these doctors were talking about, what I'm talking about, and what I learned as an apprentice in California about tonic herbalism. It's about your body's ability to adapt and then recover. It's not just the adapt, it's the recover. You have to be able to put energy back into your system to be able to thrive and to feel alive years down the road. I was so grateful to be able to find out about tonic herbalism and how it changed my own life, how it put energy back into my system, and taught me really everything that I know about health revolves around this vital aspect of rebuilding and regeneration. Anti-aging. What is anti-aging truly about? It's about putting energy back into your system so that your organs and glands are working at their optimum level of functioning. It's not about just taking an antioxidant or, something that occurs in a fruit skin somewhere, which is very beneficial for you and has its own aspects by which it builds health, but it doesn't put energy back into your system. And this is the greatest thing about tonic herbalism and why I love it and why I'll be taking tonics for the rest of my life, because of this ability to keep me from getting worn out and to always keep my system primed to actually have energy. And that's a completely different idea than going somewhere and always thinking there's something wrong with you and always thinking that there's a medicine out there that's going to save you. No, tonics allow you to not only rebuild your energy, but recalibrate your nervous system. And in that regaining of your health, you start to realize how much your emotions played in losing your health, how much your stress played in losing your health, and how you can make changes to your lifestyle that fit right along with taking your tonic herbs, to where the combination of that and a good diet, all of a sudden you start taking on a level of vitality and energy that you've never had before. You start to see that a lot of your issues are really just issues of being worn out and not seeing life clearly. This is one of the other lessons I learned when I started to regain my energy from being so stressed out and having chronic fatigue, was that you realize that you don't even see life clearly because you're too worn out and you're too tired. And once you regain your energy, you start to see things differently. And even that little boost in how your life is changed changes the way you lose energy through stress, because you realize that you're seeing things clearly now for the first time in your entire life because your energy is back. So that's what longevity and anti-aging is really about. It's about putting energy back in your organs and glands, and there's nothing better for that you could ever do than Chinese tonic herbs. This is Roger Drummer. Thanks for tuning in to the HerbWorks podcast. And if you want more information, go to herbworks.com.